All right, so we're diving right in. Bainbridge Island politics, 4 city council meetings worth of minutes. And wow, is there a lot to unpack?
It's a gold mine, really.
Yeah, it's not just, dry minutes. This is a glimpse into the decisions that are shaping your community.
Exactly.
We're going to figure out the why behind the what and really highlight what it means for you.
And how it affects your daily life.
Exactly.
Things that maybe you wouldn't think about.
Exactly. So let's kick things off with the January 9th meeting. A new mayor was chosen. I was surprised by how close that initial vote was. I don't know about you.
Yeah, it was a nail-biter for sure.
Yeah.
Especially at the beginning.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, those first few rounds of voting really showed us the dynamics of this new council.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it seems like such a routine thing.
Right, right.
New mayor, but there was a lot more to it.
It's never as simple as it seems, is it?
Never. So, okay. 3 votes went to Hytopoulos, 3 went to Dietz, and then Fantroy Johnson only had her own vote.
Deadlock. Classic deadlock.
Classic deadlock. And what happened?
5-minute recess.
5-minute recess.
Which is never 5 minutes.
Never 5 minutes.
Let's be honest.
And I can only imagine what's happening, behind those closed doors.
Oh, the hushed negotiations.
Right.
The strategizing.
The alliances.
Exactly.
Okay, so they come back. And
The stalemate continues.
of course it does.
They decide, okay, let's ditch the usual routine and let's go for a ranked choice voting system.
Which is not typical.
Not typical at all
Well,
for the city council. It's kind of cool.
it's very interesting.
Yeah.
So walk us through how that works.
So basically, each council member got to rank their top 3 choices for mayor.
Okay.
So it added a little bit more nuance to the process.
Okay, and the winner is?
With a whopping 15 points, Dietz emerged victorious,
Okay.
narrowly surpassing Hytopoulos with 14, and Fantroy Johnson trailing a little bit with 13 points.
Interesting. Okay, so Dietz is mayor. What does this signal for the island? What do we know?
That's the million-dollar question, right? Well, if we look at his committee assignments, it seems like affordable housing and revitalizing the downtown area are high on the agenda.
Interesting. Okay.
Those are some big ones,
Yeah, they are.
but important ones.
It's very important. And we're going to delve into those a little bit more deeply. But before we do, let's move on to the January 23rd meeting. Public comment stole the show, or at least sparked a pretty lively debate.
Yeah, this new council, they're still finding their footing.
They are?
And this meeting, this is where things got really interesting.
It did.
Because they were considering a resolution to require people on Zoom to be on camera and state their name during public comment.
Which, on the surface, seems reasonable for transparency's sake.
Right, you want to know who you're talking to,
Exactly.
but it gets a little complicated.
It does. And that's where I think some of the heart of the matter lies. Because what really stirred the pot was this proposed restriction limiting in-person comments to agenda items only.
That's when things got heated. It sparked this whole conversation about free speech, citizen engagement.
Right.
How do you balance those things in a digital age?
And I think we saw some of those dynamics at play, particularly, Councilmember Fantroy Johnson emerged as a really strong advocate for that open dialogue,
Oh, absolutely.
even calling a point of order when it seemed like the conversation was veering a little bit off course.
Right, she was not afraid to hold their feet to the fire.
No.
In a respectful way, of course.
In a very respectful way. And it's a classic dilemma, right? Because how do you ensure that everyone feels heard while also maintaining order and, making sure the meeting runs somewhat efficiently?
Right, because you can't have everyone speaking for unlimited amounts of time. It's a balancing act.
Yeah.
And it's something that a lot of local governments are grappling with, not just Bainbridge Island. It's a sign of the times.
It is.
This whole Zoom world we live in.
The hybrid world that we're all trying to navigate.
Exactly.
So what happened? What was the final decision?
Well, they voted to move forward with a resolution,
Okay.
but, big but,
Okay.
without the in-person comment restriction.
Interesting.
So kind of a partial victory
It is.
for those who are really passionate about that open dialogue.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you can bet this isn't the last word on public participation.
Oh, absolutely not. This is going to be an ongoing conversation. This is going to be something that I think we revisit a lot.
Oh, for sure.
A partial victory. I like that.
Yeah.
But you're right. This is not going away.
Oh, no. Public participation is a hot topic.
It is. And speaking of hot topics, let's talk about short-term rental regulations.
Ah, yes, the STR debate rages on.
It does, and we saw that reflected in the minutes. This has been an ongoing conversation on Bainbridge.
Right, it's not a new issue.
Not at all. But we saw in January they were looking at Ordinance 2024-02, which would establish these new rules for short-term rentals.
Your Airbnbs, your VRBOs.
Exactly. And it's a topic that always generates a lot of strong opinion.
Oh, yeah, people have feelings about it.
They do, and for good reason. I mean, we're talking about something that really sits at the intersection of tourism, housing availability, and the overall character of our neighborhoods.
Absolutely. It's about what kind of community we want to be.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes this debate so interesting. You know, it's not just about, oh, can I make some extra money on my property? It's about what makes a community feel like home.
Right, because if you have a revolving door of tourists next door, it changes the feel of a neighborhood.
It does. And so you see that tension playing out in the minutes. Like, we see letters of support from groups like the Bainbridge Innkeepers and the Chamber of Commerce.
Right, they're looking at the economic side of things.
Exactly.
Which is important, too.
Oh, absolutely. Tourism is a big part of the island's economy.
For sure. But on the other hand,
There's always another hand.
there is, especially with this issue. Residents, a lot of them, they've voiced concerns about the potential downsides.
Right, because we're not just talking about the economic impact. We're talking about increased noise, increased traffic. And I think that, some people fear it erodes that sense of community.
Yeah, that feeling of knowing your neighbors.
Exactly.
It's a tough one, trying to find that sweet spot.
It is.
Support local businesses, welcome visitors, but also keep those things that make Bainbridge Island unique.
Yeah. It's a tough needle to thread. And I think the January 23rd meeting was particularly interesting.
Oh, yeah. What happened?
We really saw residents on both sides of this issue show up for public comment.
I bet that was lively.
I'm sure it was. And I think the council, to their credit, they recognized the weight of this decision.
Yeah.
And so they opted to hold a dedicated meeting solely focused on short-term rental regulations on February 13th.
Makes sense.
Yeah. Give it the time and attention it deserves.
Absolutely, because this is something that's going to have lasting impacts.
It will. We'll definitely have to keep an eye out for those minutes.
Oh, yeah, I can't wait to dig into that one.
Me too.
Yeah.
But speaking of lively topics, we can't forget about the Senior Center redevelopment project.
Oh, right. That was a big one.
This was a major agenda item, particularly in the January 16th meeting. The proposal involves a really interesting partnership between the city and the Senior Center to basically breathe some new life into that existing facility.
Okay, so it's more than just a renovation.
Yeah, it sounds like they really want to create a true community hub, a space for connection and activity, not just for seniors, but maybe even other residents as well.
Interesting. Kind of like an intergenerational space.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, no conversation about anything on Bainbridge Island would be complete without talking about affordable housing.
Right, it's the elephant in the room.
Always.
Or the island, I guess.
Right, exactly.
In this case.
But it's a persistent challenge here. And this project, it's interesting because it presents a really unique opportunity to address that head on.
Okay, how so?
Well, Charlie Winslow, who seems to be a go-to expert on this issue.
I've heard that name.
Yeah. He presented information on how affordable housing could actually be integrated into this senior center redevelopment.
Oh, wow. So they're really thinking creatively about this.
They are. They're thinking outside the box.
Because it's not always easy to integrate affordable housing into a project like this, right?
No, it's not. It takes a lot of planning. It takes community input. And it takes a real commitment to finding solutions that actually work for everybody.
Right, because you don't want to just stick affordable housing units in a corner somewhere and call it a day.
Exactly. It needs to be well thought out, well integrated.
But if they can pull it off, the rewards could be huge.
Exactly. And it seems like the council is really genuinely interested in exploring those possibilities. It really seems like they are, and they're putting their money where their mouth is because they did vote unanimously to move that memorandum of understanding forward.
Okay, so they're serious about making this happen.
Yeah, it'll be fascinating to see what kind of community spaces emerge from this whole redevelopment.
Absolutely. And whether they can truly make it a space for everyone.
Exactly. And speaking of shaping the future of Bainbridge Island, we can't overlook the council's commitment to sustainable transportation.
Ah, yes, another hot button issue.
Always this came up in the January 23rd meeting with a motion to actually create a dedicated subcommittee for this very issue.
Okay, so transportation is getting its own little task force.
It seems like it, which tells you something about the importance of it.
Right, because you might think, Why a whole subcommittee just for transportation?
Right.
But anyone who's experienced that afternoon ferry rush hour
Oh, yeah.
can tell you traffic congestion is a real concern on this island.
Oh, absolutely. And the council, they already have a sustainable transportation plan in place, but
Right. It's one thing to have a plan, it's another to
really
actually
to happen.
put it into action.
Exactly. And that requires dedicated focus and maybe even some tough choices.
For sure.
And it seems like Councilmember Schneider is particularly passionate about this.
Oh, really?
They were the one who submitted the formal request to create this subcommittee.
So they're ready to roll up their sleeves and get to work?
It seems like it. And while not everyone was initially on board, that motion to create the subcommittee did pass with a 6-1 vote.
Okay, so it's clear that there's a growing recognition within the council that this isn't just, a nice to have. This is essential.
It's essential for the island's future.
Exactly. And it's not just about cars and ferries either. It's about looking ahead, anticipating what the community's needs are going to be down the road.
Exactly, making sure Bainbridge stays livable.
Livable, vibrant, a place where people want to be.
Absolutely. And, in fact, if you take a step back and look at these meetings as a whole, you start to see a pattern emerging.
Oh, yeah. What's the common thread?
Well, whether it's this debate over short-term rentals, the push for affordable housing, this focus on sustainable transportation, these are all interconnected issues.
They're all about the future of the island.
Exactly. And what I find really fascinating is how the council navigates these really complex, interconnected challenges.
Right, because it's not always easy to find solutions that address all those things at once.
It's not. And we see that in some of the smaller details of these meetings, too, like even just the appointment of council members to various boards and committees.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so tell me more about that. How does that play into this?
Well, take the January 23rd meeting, for example. They discuss these assignments, and it really reveals a lot about individual priorities and the council's overall approach to governing.
Okay, give me an example.
Well, it's interesting to note that Mayor Dietz and Councilmember Haitopoulos are representing the island on the Kitsap Regional Coordinating Council.
Okay, and what does that council do?
They're dealing with the big picture stuff that extends beyond just Bainbridge Island. So we're talking regional transportation planning, growth management, things like that.
So they're sending their heavy hitters to represent the island's interests.
It seems like it. And speaking of heavy hitters, one council member who seems to be finding their voice early on is Councilmember Moriwaki.
What have they been up to?
They've really taken a leadership role on issues like affordable housing and the senior center redevelopment.
So really focused on creating a more equitable and inclusive community.
Exactly. And of course, we can't forget about Mayor Dietz's desire to bring a little artistic flair to those roundabouts.
Oh, right. I loved that little detail in the minutes. It's like he wants to put Bainbridge on the map for roundabout art.
Maybe. And you know what I love about that detail is that it's such a small thing, but it speaks volumes.
It does. It tells you about his vision for the island.
Exactly, because public art, even in those unexpected places, it can spark joy, encourage reflection. It can become a real source of community pride.
It's those little touches that make a community unique.
Exactly. So I think the big takeaway from all of this is if you only skim the headlines, you might think local government, it's all about budgets and zoning ordinances.
The dry stuff.
Right. But when you actually dive deep into the minutes, did you realize it's about so much more than that?
It's about people.
It is. It's about navigating these complex challenges, balancing competing interests, and ultimately it's about shaping the future of our community.
And the best part is it's not a spectator sport. Anyone can get involved.
Exactly. Your voice, your ideas, your engagement, it all matters. So next time you see a notice for a city council meeting, don't just scroll past it. Take a moment to tune in, learn about what's being discussed, and maybe even share your own perspective.
Who knows? You might just inspire the next roundabout masterpiece.
Ah.